Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
My friends and I are avid gamers, especially when it comes to card games. We'll play just about any new game once, even if it's experimental or complicated. But I never imagined my friends and I would end up being chosen to playtest a new game. I just wish I had known we were playing the game before it had ended. Our friend group started out with just Charlie and I. We've been best friends since middle school, when we were the nerdy kids who played video games and watched horror movies. We weren't the most popular kids when we were younger, but by the end of high school, our fighting game tournaments had become such a big thing that even guys on the football team and girls way out of our league hung out with us. Even when everyone went their own ways after graduation, Charlie and I hung out. Life would get in the way, but we always made a point to catch up and play a few games online when we could. Eventually, we played less as we worked more, and I got used to playing virtual card games like Hearthstone and Slay the Spire. So when Charlie suggested that we start going to Magic the Gathering tournaments at our local game store, Fantastic Heroes, I was sold. That's how we met Johnny and Sean. Despite Johnny looking like someone more likely to spend his evenings at the gym than playing games, he was clearly a veteran Magic player, evident by the fact that he wiped the floor with each of us every time we played. He had just met Sean at Fantastic Heroes the night we met, and asked if we wanted to join them for a few games. Sean was a new player, but a quick learner. He was quiet and reserved, but I could tell he was picking up on our strategies as we played. As I got to know him, I learned he was finishing up school, and he was even majoring in the same subject I majored in before I graduated. Over time, we became a tightly knit friend group and hung out outside of tournament nights. Sean couldn't always come out because he was busy studying or writing papers, but I had gone through the same coursework, so I understood. The dynamic of our friend group developed, and we settled into a natural hierarchy, with the most outgoing of us at the top. This was clearly Johnny. Johnny was very outgoing, almost to a fault. Sometimes I'd wonder if he'd ever even whispered the word no. If he had an opportunity, he would take it, and seemed to take an interest in everyone he met. At times when I would prefer to stop at small talk, he would plunge deeper into conversation. These are good traits to have, of course. The problem is that in his willingness to make conversation with anybody, Johnny would sometimes attract people that others recognize they should avoid. A few months ago, Charlie, Johnny, and I went to a local trivia night at a bar we sometimes go to called Lucky's. Teams were split up into groups of 4, but Sean couldn't make it, so we arrived hoping that we could play with a team of 3. As it turned out, there was another guy who didn't have a team to play with, so the bar employee running trivia night suggested that he should join our team. Johnny, being the yes man that he is, perked right up and said that we'd be glad to have him join us. The bar employee motioned to a man sitting at the bar who seemed roughly around our age, no more than 25 years old, average-looking with brown, stringy hair and droopy eyes. He had been slumped over looking at his phone and seemed startled when the bar employee walked over to tap him on the shoulder, since he didn't realize he was being called over. He got up from his bar stool and strolled over to us, nervously introducing himself. You guys need a 4th player?" he asked. Johnny stepped up, extended a hand, and said, "Yeah, man, welcome to the team. I'm Johnny." "Derek," he replied, shaking Johnny's hand. "These are my friends, Charlie and Felix," Johnny added. Charlie and I walked over and shook Derek's hand, and I immediately noticed how cold and clammy his hand was. I figured he may have just been anxious. I know I feel the same way when I'm in an unfamiliar setting. We took our seats at one of the booths in the bar and began settling in for trivia. While we were getting comfortable, taking off our jackets and setting our things aside, I noticed how nervous and awkward Derek seemed. He fidgeted a lot, like someone who doesn't know what to do with his hands when they're not in his pockets, so I decided to break the ice. Have you ever gone to trivia night before? I asked. Oh, no, this is my first time, he said, barely cutting through the awkwardness between us. That's all right. We've done this a few times, so we'll walk you through it, I replied. A brief moment later, I saw him pick up his phone and start swiping through it, even opening his calculator and his contacts app, clearly acting as though he had something important to check on. The other guys had gotten comfortable, ready to answer some trivia questions, and I noticed that after a few minutes, Derek still seemed as stiff and uncomfortable as when we began. Johnny stepped in to eviscerate any remaining awkwardness, asking Derek whether he was into gaming. I saw Derek's eyes light up at the question. Yeah, I love gaming, he replied. What do you play? The guys and I have been playing a lot of Destiny 2 lately, but we're into just about everything. We actually met at a Magic tournament. Do you play? For a moment, Derek perked up and it seemed like Johnny had successfully broken through this guy's shell. Well, I'm more of a collector than a player. I'm actually working on my own card game as a sort of passion project, Derek replied. That sounds cool. How do you play it? Charlie chimed in. Well, it's all sort of under wraps right now. I'm waiting for the right time to make it public, but it turns collecting the cards into the game itself, Derek said sheepishly. Do you have a name for it yet? I asked. I'm still on the fence, but I'm thinking of calling it Taken Faces. Ooh, creepy, said Charlie, making a ghostly gesture with his hands. What sort of game is it? I asked, puzzled by the name Taken Faces. Well, like I mentioned, collecting the cards will be part of the game itself. Every card will be completely unique, and the quality of your collection helps you progress through the game, he replied, making eye contact a little too long for my own comfort. That sounds like a creative idea, Charlie interjected. Yeah, I added, not fully satisfied with Derek's explanation. You'll have to show me sometime, said Johnny. I'll give you my number after this. Derek quietly nodded, and we noticed the trivia night hosts looked as though they were about to begin. We shifted our focus to the hosts, and each of us in our group began putting away our phones. Derek seemed to loosen up and get comfortable, but kept his phone face down on the edge of the table, close to his chest. The hosts walked around the room, and I watched as they pointed to people in other groups who still had their phones out, motioning for them to put them away. They wouldn't want any of the teams to have an unfair advantage, after all. I looked at Derek as he shifted in his seat, clutching his phone on the table, and I cleared my throat to get his attention. Hey, don't forget to put your phone away. They won't start until everyone does, I said to Derek. He feigned a smile and quickly placed the phone into his jacket pocket, and as the other guys were becoming attentive and ready for trivia to start, I watched the smile fade from Derek's face and shift to a slight frown with pursed lips. Trivia began, and within the first 30 minutes our team began building up a decent score against the other teams. Charlie and I answered most of the questions for our team, but our Renaissance man Johnny stepped in for questions the rest of us were unsure of, especially when it came to sports and history trivia. Derek spoke up occasionally, but only after someone else had already started discussing the answer. That was until we had to answer the most disturbing and seemingly out-of-place question of the night. What is the name of the serial killer born in Burlington, Vermont, who was regarded as handsome and charismatic by his victims? One of the hosts read, giving the participants a mischievous look, leading on that he knew it was a dark question to ask. Derek answered without hesitation. Ted Bundy, he said aloud, before any of us could respond to the question. Correct, the host replied. Johnny and Charlie didn't seem to think anything of Derek's response. I, on the other hand, took note of a crooked smile that began to form on his lips, putting up red flags I could see from a mile away. The rest of the night was like the beginning of the night. Johnny and Charlie answered most of the rest of the questions, as I felt myself shift into more of an observer role, looking for any sign that Derek might be caught slipping and say something that the other guys would feel equally suspicious of. At the time, I thought I may have just been reading too much into it, because after that, he went back to being as shy as he was earlier in the night. By the end of trivia night, the guys seemed to have adopted Derek as one of our own, but something just didn't sit right with me. After trivia ended and we placed a very close second, we all began to pack up, and I couldn't wait to get out of the bar and get home. That's when I realized Derek might be creepier than I had originally thought. After we said our goodbyes and left the bar, I realized that Derek was following behind me, while Johnny and Charlie walked to their own cars. I unlocked my car and started to get in when I saw Derek from the corner of my eye, standing between my car and the car to the left of mine. "Hey, tonight was fun. Maybe I can show you my game soon," he said, awkwardly standing next to my car, as though he was trying to keep me from backing out. "Yeah, maybe," I replied. "See you later, alright?" But Derek didn't move. It felt like time had stopped, but I knew it had only been seconds that he was standing there before he gestured toward the car to the left of mine. I didn't even realize the other car had been backed in, and he might be waiting for me so he could get into it. "Oh, I said awkwardly. "Sorry, see you later." He moved from between the two cars, and I backed out. As I drove away, I kept my eyes on him in my rearview mirror, waiting to see if he might follow me home. What he ended up doing was even more shocking, as he walked away from the backed-in car that had been next to mine and got into a completely different car halfway across the parking lot. By this point, I was making my first turn onto the main road, and for a moment, I considered speeding away so he couldn't follow me. As I rounded each turn of every street back to my house, I found myself looking out for Derek's car, but saw nothing. I managed to get home without him following me, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking of Derek's crooked smile and wondering what other disturbing factoids swim around in his head. After trivia night with Derek, I saw him in passing a few times, mostly when he would meet up with the guys. It quickly got to the point where I would find convenient reasons that I needed to leave whenever he was there. Truthfully, I couldn't stand the guy. His crooked smile, the way he often made subtle movements that made it seem like he was hiding what he was looking at, or what was in his pocket, and his demeanor overall made me want nothing to do with him. And worst of all, the other guys just didn't seem to be picking up on what was making me so uncomfortable about him. I continued making excuse after excuse to get out of meeting up with the guys, to the point where I felt like it might become detrimental to our friendships. I saw Derek clawing his way into our friend group, and I felt like all I could do was watch. Otherwise, I would risk making myself out to be the bad guy who was just insecure and jealous that someone else was spending time with his best friends. I just couldn't stand him. On 3 or 4 occasions, he tried to get me to hang out with him so he could show me his card game, but the thought of spending time with him one-on-one made my skin crawl. I even tried explaining my case to Charlie. After all, my oldest friend should be able to understand or explain why I'm totally off base. Even when I wasn't meeting up with the other guys, I still hung out with Charlie and played online with him when I could. So I used one of our Destiny 2 sessions as an opportunity to air my concerns. Let me know if I've completely lost it, but I really don't feel comfortable with Derek always hanging around, I said, not so casually slipping it into our conversation. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" Charlie replied. "Part of it is the way he acts so nervous around us all the time. I get it. I mean, some people are just more anxious than others. But there's just something about him that doesn't seem quite right. I wouldn't say you've lost it, but I haven't gotten that from him. Some people are just awkward like that. You said it yourself." I knew that it would be hard to get my seriousness across to Charlie over voice chat alone, but I pressed on. That night, after trivia, when he had that answer about Ted Bundy, I had a strange interaction with him in the parking lot. Charlie didn't say anything after a moment, so I continued. It really seemed like he was trying to follow me to my car. He was just standing there when I got to my car, and he made it seem like he was parked next to me, but when I drove off, he got into a completely different car. I'm just glad he didn't follow me home after that. I don't know, man, Charlie replied. I wouldn't think too much about it. Every time I've hung out with him, he's been fine. As far as the trivia question goes, even you watch true crime videos. Does that mean you're some kind of criminal? No, I guess you're right. I just don't know, I said non-committally. I wouldn't worry too much about it. He and I are going to meet up soon so I can play test his card game. I'll let you know if I find out he's secretly some sort of lunatic. He laughed it off, but I couldn't bring myself to join him. Yeah, please do, I replied. We found ourselves in an unusual moment of awkward tension before a knock at Charlie's door broke the silence. Hey, my DoorDash is here. Be right back. I heard Charlie drop his headset and walk to the front door, and I waited for him to get back. I could hear him faintly in the background, talking to someone at the front door before I heard his door shut. I continued playing and waited a few minutes before I heard my phone vibrate on the couch next to me. It was Charlie, letting me know he got the wrong order and had to work on getting a refund, so I could keep playing without him and he'd be back on later. I left the party chat and continued playing, occasionally checking my phone to see if Charlie was still up to play, but I figured he got sidetracked and eventually stopped checking. I tried to keep playing, but had a hard time enjoying myself after coming clean about my concerns with Derek. I found myself distracted by my phone, snooping Facebook and Instagram for any accounts Derek might have, but came up short. The guy was like a ghost. By now he must have followed at least one of the guys in our group somewhere, but I couldn't find him anywhere. No alt accounts, no anime avatars with edgy pseudonyms, nothing. After about 30 minutes, I started catching myself dozing off, and I decided to call it a night. Frantically searching for any trace of this guy's digital footprint wouldn't change how I felt about him overnight anyway. In order to collect any meaningful information about Derek, I'd need to collect my thoughts first, and start again in the morning. The first thing I did the next morning was try to check in with Charlie. We used to talk on the phone more often, but typically just text now. I sent him a text asking how he was doing and whether he got his refund, and went about my business as I normally would. It was my day off from work, so I took advantage of the extra time trying to piece together what I knew about Derek. I knew he was spending more time with Johnny than anyone else in our group, so I scoured Johnny's Instagram likes and comments to see if he interacted with him since trivia night. Unfortunately, there wasn't much to see, and I had to take my search to Charlie and Sean's accounts. Charlie never mentioned Derek posting anything online, so it's possible they never followed one another. Still, I took the time to look for him just like I did with Johnny's accounts, and again, there wasn't anything to see. No matter how I tried to find him, I just couldn't. At this point, I figured the best thing to do while waiting for Charlie to get back to me was to reach out to Johnny. It was out of the norm for us to talk on the phone, so I thought that if he got a phone call out of the blue, he might be more likely to answer in case there was something serious going on. I called Johnny and got his default voicemail greeting, hung up, and opted for a text. I told him I wanted to talk about Derek and to give me a call whenever he saw my message. The longer I waited for Charlie to respond, the more panicked I began to feel, and I decided it was time to call him too. The phone rang, and after every ring, my heart sunk deeper. I got the sense that something was just not right, and the longer time went on with no response, things would only get worse. I ended up getting the same standard voicemail greeting from Charlie, but this time I left a message saying I needed him to call me back as soon as possible. I briefly felt a sense of relief when I felt my phone vibrate, but a rush of dread and confusion plummeted into me when I realized I'd gotten a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "Hey, it's Derek from Trivia Night. I've been playtesting my new game with the guys. You free sometime today?" Not only could I not get through to Charlie and Johnny, but the last person I wanted to hear from had somehow gotten my phone number. It was completely unlike one of the guys to give out my number without asking first, and I felt an icy sting of panic course through my veins. "How did you get my number?" I replied. There was no point in acting cordial now. I had never even pretended to like Derek, and there didn't seem to be a point in keeping up appearances when I couldn't get in touch with my actual friends. "I think you gave it to me at trivia night, didn't you?" he asked. "No, I don't usually give my number out," I responded. If he was going to play this off, he would have to do better than that. He didn't wait long before responding. "Oh, it must have been Charlie that gave it to me." "I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I've got plans today anyway," I said, dropping any pretense that I was willing to give Derek the time of day. "Come on, Felix. My game is getting better every day. You're going to love my collection when you see it," he replied, either not catching on to my tone or not caring either way. "No thanks, I'm not interested," I replied, ready to put this conversation to an abrupt end. His final message was short. "Your loss." My hands were shaking from the digital confrontation when it hit me. The phone number he was using might help me to dig up information about Derek. I quickly copied the number and pasted it into Google, hoping to find out anything about Derek, but was immediately stopped in my tracks when I discovered the phone number seemed to be unlisted. Was he so committed to privacy that he even used burner phone apps on people that he was trying to be friends with? Or was there something more sinister at play? I had hardly regained my composure before it started. My phone started buzzing and pinging steadily as text messages started coming through. The first one I saw was from Sean. I couldn't believe I hadn't tried to call him when I didn't hear from Johnny or Charlie, so I was glad he was a step ahead of me. "Let's play Taken Faces," his message read. I went back to my other messages and saw texts from Charlie and Johnny. I checked on Charlie's first. "Let's play Taken Faces," it said. I didn't know whether the guys were playing a joke on me, but considering my recent interaction with Derek, I didn't find it funny. I went back to look at my other messages and saw one from Johnny. "Let's play Taken Faces." Again, I went back to my messages and saw another from Derek's number. "Let's play Taken Faces." That was the last straw. It was one thing if Derek wanted to weasel his way into my friend group, but I wouldn't just sit there and take this kind of weirdness. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether I was the butt of a cruel joke or if this psychopath managed to get a hold of the guys' phones. I ran to my room to grab my jacket and wallet and quickly headed to the kitchen where I kept my car keys on a hook. I would need to drive straight to Charlie's to check on him myself, and if even the slightest thing seemed wrong when I got there, I would call the cops. With my car keys in hand, I nearly bolted to the front door and swung it open. What I saw when I opened it stunned me. At my front doorstep stood Derek, clutching a black 3-ring binder to his chest, half scowling up at me from under his furrowed brow with his crooked smile. "Let's play Taken Faces, Felix," he said as his lips curled upward into an unnatural, near parody of a smile. I looked over Derek's shoulder to see if the guys might have been waiting behind him, but all I saw was the same car I had seen him get into on trivia night parked in my driveway, blocking my car in. "The guys helped me play test my game. It's your turn," he said, standing in the same position with the same inhuman expression. "What did you do to them? Why do you have their phones?" I asked, my heart thumping, making my pulse nearly visible through my neck. "They helped me with my latest expansion," he replied, looking up at me through his brow, taking a step toward me. He just stood there, slightly hunched over, his medium-length hair hanging against the sides of his face while staring straight through me. His only movement was his shoulders rising and falling with his breath, and in that moment I felt like I was face to face with some sort of demonic presence. I tried to slam the door shut when I realized his boot was blocking the doorway. "You like collectibles, don't you, Felix?" As soon as I tried to kick his boot out of the doorway, he shoved the door into me, knocking me onto the ground. Until now, I had never gotten into a physical altercation with anyone, but my body kicked into fight-or-flight mode as adrenaline clouded my senses. Without a word, I scrambled to my feet and shoved Derek backward, swiping the binder from his grip. "Oh, now you want to see my cards?" he asked, trying to regain his balance. "What is this?" I demanded, smacking the binder with the back of my hand and watching as a few scraps of cardstock came loose, drifting to the tile floor of my living room. "It's my collection, Felix. I told you I had a new game. We're playing it right now," he said with a chuckle. He stood with his hands on his knees, his breath quickening, and his chuckle intensified until he was beside himself with laughter. The sound of laughter was drowned by a pounding in my head and ringing in my ears, and I decided to find out exactly what his new game was. I opened the binder and saw sheet after sheet of 3x3 card sleeves, most of which had handmade cards with miniature instant film prints glued on the front. Very quickly, I realized the photos each had one horrifying thing in common. Each photo was of a person bound with rope, their mouths taped shut, and their eyes wide open in fear, as though the scream they couldn't let out through their mouths escaped from the nearest opening. Derek wasn't lying about this being a game. He was just the only one who knew he was playing it. He even made the effort to imitate the format of mainstream collectible card games, with each card including a name above the photo and a short description below the photo. Avery Smith, 5'6", likes to run, read one card with a photo of a terrified young man with curly brown hair and a white tank top. Camille Davis, 5'9", talks too much, read another card with a photo of a woman with black hair and a prominent blonde highlight on the right side of her head, squinting slightly as though she was silently pleading. "Want to see the expansion, Felix?" Derek asked, now standing over my right shoulder as I had found myself hunched over sitting on the edge of my couch. Flip to the last page. What did you do?" I asked, trembling as I flipped to the last page of the binder. I knew what I was about to see, but I never could have prepared myself for it. Sean O'Malley, 6'2", not aware of his surroundings. Charlie Owens, 5'11", good fighter but terrible runner. Johnny Mullen, 6 foot, gullible and easy to catch. In each photo, my friends had a shocked look of existential dread someone might have on their face if they were staring the headlights of a bus head-on. Even closer than before, I heard and even felt Derek's voice just behind my right ear, forcing a chill down my spine. "I'm a collector, Felix, and you were incredibly challenging to pull." I felt an icy sting, followed by the sensation of a chemical aroma coming from within my own head, and as my vision blurred, I saw the binder close on my lap and be pulled away from my view. Then, just as quickly as my vision had blurred, the world around me darkened, and I fell onto the couch, paralyzed and numb. No time at all seemed to have elapsed before I opened my eyes and found myself in an unfamiliar room. My hands were bound behind my back as I sat in a metal folding chair with a long piece of duct tape over my mouth. The room was dimly lit by a single gooseneck lamp clamped to a cheap metal desk. The walls were pinned with dozens of cards I assumed were prototypes of Derek's disturbing game. But what shocked me the most was that none of them had photos like the ones in the binders. Instead, they only included names. How long had he been planning this? And how many others were planned to be part of this collection, without even realizing they were being hunted? There wasn't a window in sight, and there was no indication that natural light had ever penetrated the room. It was dank, and the air was slightly pungent, making me wonder if I was underground or in someone's basement. I could hardly move my body due to the lingering effects of whatever had been used on me when I lost consciousness, so I was limited in what I could do to try to get myself out of the room. As I looked around the room for any clue as to where I was or how I could get out, I saw a single card on the desk in front of me. Felix Stone, 5'8", likes to play hard to get. My ears began to ring as I felt my pulse quicken, and I imagined what Charlie and Johnny felt when they found themselves in the same place. From behind me, I heard a door creak open, and within seconds I was face to face with Derek, as perverse as I thought he was the day I met him at Lucky's. "I was so fortunate to have met you, Felix," he said as he brushed his cold hand from the front of my forehead to the crown of my head. The mixture of his icy touch and the sweat from my forehead took me by surprise and gave me a chill. Johnny should have learned not to be so quick to talk to strangers. Once he opened up to me, Charlie and Sean were easy. But you're special. You're rare. You don't let just anyone in. You're very hard to get. Derek set a bag down on the desk and began methodically placing pieces of camera equipment down in a neat array. I tried to yell, but the sounds barely escaped the duct tape covering my mouth. I watched as he attached a lens to a camera body and removed the lens cap, placing it in precisely the same spot the lens had been. Despite the meticulous manner in which he was treating his camera equipment, his body movements became more fluid, as though he was vapor floating and dancing through the room, not knowing where he would land. But I knew where he would land. I had seen the photos. The game is almost over, Felix. It's a shame we can't play again. You almost had me toward the end. If only you could have convinced Charlie. I watched as he held the camera to his chest, the lens pointed toward me. He lifted the camera to peer through the viewfinder, ready to make his final move. I shut my eyes tight. I was face to face with evil, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of being able to look me in the eyes and see into my soul. If I was going to be on one of his cards, I wouldn't be like the others. After all, I'm rare. "Hey, Felix," he said as the room suffocated with a discomforting quiet. I kept my eyes tightly closed and refused to acknowledge him. I never agreed to play this game. I heard a click, and through my eyelids, I saw the room flood with light from the camera flash. Then, just as quickly as the room had lit up, everything went dark. Good game.